Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you the Philidor with 3 bishop d3 and f3. So after the moves e4, d6, d4, knight f6, here white can play f3 and bishop d3. First of all, let's see f3. This is a solid move. White is defending the e4 pawn. And the trick is that he wants to go c4, then knight c3. So he wants to include the pawn on c4 in order to get a Zemish setup. This is quite an ambitious approach. And here the main moves are g6, entering the King's Indian, probably after c4, or e5 is again a main move. d5 was tried, knight bd7. However, I'm going to show you a very nice idea, quite a rare idea that I'm pretty sure is going to surprise your opponents, and it will give you a fully playable position. e6. It may look like a modest move. The idea is to go bishop e7 and castle, and only afterwards to break the center with c5. However, it is very flexible. We're not showing our cards yet. And it gives a very interesting play. Here, white has 2 plans. One of them is to go c4 and then knight c3 and so on. And the other one is to skip the move c4 and just go knight c3 and try to then, of course, bishop e3, queen d2, long castle, and try to push the pawns on the king side in order to checkmate us. So we're going to see 3 continuations here: bishop e3, knight c3, and c4. Sometimes they transpose. Let's see them one by one. First of all, knight c3. White is geared toward kingside attack. We go bishop e7, bishop e3, and this transposes to the line with bishop e3 immediately. We're going to talk about it a bit later. c4. c4 is the ambitious approach. White wanted to go for a Zemish setup anyway. So he's including this pawn on c4, gaining more space in the center. And then he wants to follow up with knight c3 and so on. Bishop e7. This is our plan in all the variations, or I should say almost all the variations. We go bishop e7, then castle, and then we're going to decide how to react in the center. So bishop e7, knight c3, very natural move, castle. And here we're going to see bishop d3. If bishop e3, we're going to talk about it later on. It will transpose to the lines with bishop e3 immediately. So now we see this line with bishop d3, which is different from the other lines. The idea of bishop d3 is to develop the bishop, and then white wants to play knight e2 without leaving the bishop on f1. And here I like this move a6. Very mysterious, small pawn move, but it's very useful and it's quite deep. The idea is to go c5, and then if white goes d5, then this pawn on a6 will prove to be very useful in pushing b5. If we, it's good to understand why we go for this a6. The point is, if we go c5 right away, white plays d5, and now if knight bd7 to jump to e5, All is good if we manage to do this, but white has very strong move f4 here. And now the e5 square is under control, and the knight has a much better square than on e2. The knight is jumping to f3, controlling the center much better, and here white is better. So we want to avoid this, and that's why we go for this small move, a6. I'm pretty sure your opponents will be very surprised by this move because they don't know, I mean, what is he doing? E6, bishop e7, castle, and then a6, not showing his cards at all. But yeah, it all works. Trust me. And here we're going to see bishop e3, a4, and knight g2. Basically, all the moves that make sense in this position. First of all, bishop e3, this is very natural. The bishop belongs to e3. And white wants to see what we're doing. Here, the move is c5. Also, it's possible to go first knight d7 and c5. But let's not delay c5 any longer. Let's go for it. D takes c5. Okay, now if white goes d5, this is a worse version of d5 because we have this pawn on a6. We included this. And we have several ways to go here, knight d7, or even we can take, and if white takes on d5, we can go b5 and so on. So here you can see that the pawn on a6 is really useful. So white takes on c5, pawn takes. And now the plan is to go e5 in order to gain more space in the center and then continue f4, knight f3, very harmonious development. Knight fd7, what else? f4. So now the e5 pawn is secured and the knight has a better square than on e2. Wants to go to f3. Knight c6, knight f3. Well, so far so good, but we can see that on the long term, if white has time to consolidate his position, he's going to get a very good position or to get a large advantage. He only needs to castle, and then he could create threats on the h7 pawn. White obviously has more space, and we have problems with this bishop on c8. So here we need to do something quickly, and we have very strong move b5. I like this move very much. And it's a pawn sacrifice, but this completely changes the character of the position. And if white takes the pawn, then he will lose some time, will distract our opponent from development, and we will get good compensation. So now let's see what white can do. Of course, the main move is to take on b5, but there are other options. For example, h4, which has this idea, this not so hidden sacrifice to just take on h7, then knight g5. Of course, we cannot take on g5 because h takes g5, and then queen h5, and white wants to checkmate us. All is good, but we can just go h6, and now there is no more bishop h7 check. And if white wants to castle, then this h4 pawn could be a weakness later on. So we are fine here. White has no time to do this. There is also b3 to secure this pawn on c4. I would say that taking on b5 is much more tempting than playing b3, but let's see this move as well. We can take on c4, b takes c4, and bishop b7. It's very important that we manage to develop our light square bishop on this long diagonal. Bishop is excellently placed here. And knight check, but white doesn't have streaks with queen b1 or bishop h7 because of lack of development. So that doesn't work. And another move, there is queen b1. Very strange move. I mean, white wants to attack the pawn on h7. He couldn't do it with queen c2 because there will be ideas of knight b4. Not immediately, but afterwards. So that's why this move, queen b1. But here we can just go g6. And now the queen is weirdly placed on b1. So, okay, basically white takes on b5. The most natural move. Taking the annoying pawn, we take back. And bishop takes b5. Okay, we gave up a pawn, but we open up some lines, the a file, the b file, and now there is an important move, queen b6. I like this move very much. We are defending the knight on c6. We are keeping an eye on this bishop on b5, and very important, we want to go rook d8 and activate the other rook. You see, we are bringing all the pieces into play. We just sacrifice the pawn, but we get great play here. Okay, white goes a4 now to consolidate the bishop on b5. This certainly makes sense. And here rook d8. Of course, there is this threat of knight e5, but white will easily avoid it. However, we want to play afterwards bishop b7 and even knight d4. This knight jump in the center looks very strong. And the situation suddenly changed. Now white's king is stuck, still stuck in the center. The queen is also in danger with because it's on the same file with the rook. And white is not really trying to attack us anymore because the bishop is disrupted, is on some other diagonal. White is defending. We have the initiative. So this is a very this is a good position for black with plenty of chances to grab the full point even. Okay, let's go back. And then there is a4. You know, there are players that whenever they see a6, they go a4. They don't want to deal with the b5 push. However, this move weakens the b4 square. And here we are suggesting this very interesting move, knight fd7. I'm going to briefly talk about move a5. This can be possible, but it's a bit passive to just secure the b4 square, and then we can bring a knight there, knight c6 or knight a6, anyway going to b4. This looks good, but it takes some time, and it's a bit passive. So that's why we're recommending knight fd7. Okay, the knight is going backwards, but we are threatening bishop h4 check, and white will have to weaken his position a little bit, and then the bishop will fall back to f6. The bishop will be active there, and we'll also have ideas to attack the d4 pawn. Later on, we can play maybe e5 or c5 accordingly. Okay, knight e2, what else? This is normal development. And we give the check. We want to provoke the move g3. If white goes knight g3, then the d4 pawn is weakened, and we can we can go e5 and then attack the pawn even further, let's say with knight c6, even a5, depending on what white is doing. And we'll have great control over the dark squares. So white goes g3, we fall back to f6, keeping the bishop active, castle, and knight c6. And here you can see that it's a completely new position. All the pieces are on the board. White apparently has more space because he pushed the pawns, but by pushing the pawns, he created some weaknesses. And white's pieces are not necessarily harmonious because, first of all, the d4 pawn is under attack, and white cannot push the pawns easily. Um, he can later on he can push f4, but then this knight on e2 is misplaced. It was much better to have the knight on f3, for example, but that is not the case. And here we can follow, of course, first of all, white has to defend the pawn on d4, and then we can follow with knight b4 and c5 to break the center. I think black has a nice position here. Let's go back. There's knight 92. This is a natural move. White is finishing the development. And now we can break the center with c5 finally. White goes d5. Otherwise, we just go knight c6, and if d5, we'll go knight e5. So white wants to take away this option. And now we take on d5. We want to see how white is going to take back. Well, c takes d5 is the main move. But if c takes d5, then there is b5. So c takes d5, there is b5, and you can see that it's very important we had this pawn on a6. Now we got some space on the queen side, and we can follow up with knight bd7, bishop rook e8, bishop f8, and so on. So because of this, white has to take with the e pawn, but this is not very ambitious. But okay, this is the only way to keep b5 under control. We go knight bd7, the knight is heading towards e5. And the main move is castle here. I just want to mention that if white goes f4 to stop this knight jump to e5, then white is in trouble after b5. Typical pawn sacrifice. I mean, I don't even consider it like a pawn sacrifice, but black gets great play, and he already has an advantage here. So castle, now knight e5, and white's problem is we're going to trade this knight for the bishop, and the bishop cannot move because then the pawn on c4 will drop. a4 to prevent b5, and now it's a good moment to take on d3. It is also possible to delay it a little bit and play bishop d7, and later on prepare this b5 idea. This is another option, but let's say knight takes d3, queen d3, and now the other knight comes to d7. There's an idea now to go knight e5 with a double attack on the queen and the c4 pawn, and we want to take the c4 pawn. Well, white basically defends the pawn with b3. If bishop f4, in order to prevent knight e5, now if we go knight e5, white wants to take on e5, which is good for white. But here we can go f5, taking away the e4 square for the knight. And we have ideas maybe to go g5 and f4, why not? So after g5, f4, the knight is again getting the square on e5. There will be also f5 square for the bishop, and so on. So let's say the more restricted b3. Now we can go b6. This is a useful move because we are stopping white from playing a5 and fixing our pawns on the queen side. And now our idea is to go 95, then 95, knight g6. We can also go rook e8. And just to point out, if white goes f4, we can go f5 to control the e4 square. But we don't want to go f5 in other situations because if we go f5 right now, then white could jump knight f4 and there is this weak square on e6. So we need to be a bit careful about this. So obviously black is fine here. We also have the bishop there. Let's go back. Bishop e3, the most flexible move. I mean, the bishop belongs to e3 anyway, so why not put it there right away? And white will see the next move, on the next move, what he's going to do, c4, knight c3. Well, our decision is very easy. We want to go bishop e7 and castle. And now it's up to white to show his ideas. So we're going to see knight c3 and c4. Knight c3. This could also transpose from the other move order if white goes knight c3 first and then bishop e3. Well, obviously the idea is to go queen d2, long castle, and then push the pawns, g pawn, h pawn, and so on, and get an attack on the king side since we will castle short, of course. Okay, castle, queen d2. And here I like this idea, again, this little move, a6. We are anticipating white's long castle and we want to push b5 and attack. They'll start a pawn race. Of course, it's possible to go c5 here as well. White can take. We also take long castle, knight c6, queen d8, rook d8, rook d8, knight d8. And this position is about equal, but it's not as exciting as the line we're offering. This looks a bit boring. So let's go a6. Long castle. And now white is ready to push g4, g5, and so on. We start pushing b5, g4, b4. Obviously, this is a position where every tempo counts and we need to act very quickly. We don't want to allow white to push his pawns. So it's a pawn race. Knight c2. This is not the ideal square for the knight, but it's the best square available. So white goes there. a5. We're defending the b4 pawn. And we're ready to push even more. g5. White also pushes knight fd7. This is a good square for the knight. Just don't go here on h5, obviously, because of knight g3, and then black is in trouble. Probably black is forced to take on g3, h3, and then black will get checkmated on the h5. So don't go for that. Knight fd7. With this move, we are preparing c5, h4. White wants to open up the lines on the king side. And now already g6 is a threat. We go for c5. We want to challenge white center and also want to follow up with knight c6. And now g6. Of course, white is in a hurry to open up the position. I like this line very much because it's so sharp. And we just ignore this pawn on g6. If we take it, white is going to push h5, and he just wants to open up the lines and then to checkmate us. So it's better to just leave the pawn alone. Knight c6. Let's not forget, it's good to develop the pieces. And well, what a crazy position, I have to say. Of course, new position and full of possibilities. All the pieces are on the board. All the three results are possible. But black is objectively fine, and I like black's chances here. I think also it's difficult for white to play because it's a new position and white doesn't know what's going on. Okay, let's go back. So this is knight c3. Now we're going to see c4. White decides to go for the semi setup. We castle, and now we're ready to push c5, knight c3, and c5. Of course, our idea is to take on d4 or even go knight c6. And here, okay, white can go d5 or go knight d2 in order to delay taking any decision with the deep one. Let's first see knight g2. White is ready to take on d4 with the knight if we want to take on d4. We don't want to take on d4, so we go knight c6. Now we're forcing white to react in the center, otherwise there is this move d5 and breaking all the center open with the white king still in the center. And okay, now white has to go d5, and this is the only reasonable move. If he takes on c5, let's say d takes c5, d takes c5, then in this position, okay, we have control over the d5 square, but white doesn't control d4 square so good. So this is good for us. d5, and we go knight e5. We are attacking on c4, but of course white is going to defend it. However, white needs to decide how to defend this pawn. Knight g3 is the good move. Also, it's tempting to go knight f4. And there could be a point to this knight f4 that is more, the knight could be more active there. However, it turns out this is a mistake because the knight is actually exposed there, and we have this move g5 out of the blue. Just going after the knight. And it turns out the knight doesn't have good squares to go, because if it falls back to e2 or d3, then c4 pawn is gone. We can take knight c4. And if white goes knight h3, then we can take on d5. So let me show you knight h3. We just take on d5 and then bishop h3. And this is bad for white, obviously. So what to do then? White goes knight d3. Knight takes e4. We take the pawn as promised. Bishop g5. This is what white was counting on probably. But after e takes d5, black is winning, or if not winning, already black has a large advantage. And we can see we open up the game, and the white king is stuck in the center, and white center is also falling apart. So knight f4 is not a good move. Knight g3. This is the typical square for the knight. However, we can immediately harass this knight with h5, typical move in this kind of positions. We want to go h4. So white is playing bishop e2. Yeah, I want to point out that h5 is not a big weakness for black. And actually with this pawn we can create weaknesses, and I mean the king is still safe. Here it's an important moment, because if we go h4 immediately, I mean we have to take 25. But if we go h4, white can go f4. So he can counter on this with this, and then white gets an advantage. So we first need to take on d5. C takes d5. We're doing this in order to open up this bishop on c8. So now we have control over the g4 square. h4, now it's time to hit the knight. And white doesn't have f4 anymore because of knight g4. So this is, it's important to remember this detail. And now, okay, what to do? What can white do with the knight? There's knight f1 or knight f5. If white goes knight f1, this is more passive. We can go knight g6. This is a new square for the knight. Usually in the Zemish lines, where the bishop is on g7, pawn on g6, the g6 square is not available. But now we can go knight g6. So this is an improved version for black. And then we can start preparing the b5 push with a6, bishop d7, rook b8. Of course, if white is stopping us with a4. And of course, at some point, white will have to go knight d2. But then, since he doesn't have queen d2 anymore, we can go knight h5, and the one knight can jump to f4. But it's important to first wait for white to play knight d2, because otherwise there is queen d2 and the knight is stuck on h5. Okay, however, here, because we don't have g6 on the board, white can jump to f5. And of course, this knight is very active here on f5. We need to get rid of it. He takes f5. And now, yeah, if white has time to consolidate his position with moves like castle or g4 or f4 and so on, white would have a large advantage. But it's our turn. And again, the typical pawn push, we've seen it in other lines. b5. Just to, this is a pawn sacrifice. We want to open up lines. There is an idea to go b4, also knight c4, if white ignores this pawn on b4. Normally, white doesn't ignore the pawn, he just grabs it. And now we can go rook b8. Of course, this was the idea, to activate the rook on the b file. There are other ideas as well, like queen c8 in order to take the pawn on f5. Also, we can go a6, and then b2 pawn is under attack. Also, another interesting idea is to go c4 and then jump with the knight to d3. So, plenty of possibilities for black for just one pawn. I like black's position here, and let's not forget the white king is still in the center. So I think it's harder to play for white in this sharp position. Let's go back. Let's see d5. White is taking some advantage, some space advantage, and it's stopping us from going knight c6. Okay, there is another way to develop the knight. So knight bd7. And here 92, 95 would transpose to the lines that we've seen. So I'm going to show you d takes e6 and knight h3. I mean, some moves that lead to different positions. First of all, d takes e6. This looks like a concession to give up the central pawn on d5. We take it. Knight h3. White is finishing the development, and this knight wants to jump on f4. That's why it's good to go e5 here to stop knight f4. White plays knight f2, and now very nice maneuver. Of course, it's not difficult, but this knight on d7 looks misplaced. In this case, we go back, knight b8, and we're going to play knight c6, and at the right moment, knight d4, greatly improving the knight's position. And yeah, this is good for black because we managed to get rid of the d5 pawn. Again, it's quite an unusual position, but since we're going to get the knight on d4, I can say black is doing great here. So white goes knight h3. This is a good way to develop the knight in the Zemish setups. White just has to be careful about this bishop on c8 so that we don't have the option to go bishop h3. But here we have the knight on d7, so it's not possible. The knight is heading to f2. Then he wants to go bishop e2, castle, and so on. And this is the problem in the Zemish. If white goes knight e2, then this bishop on f1 doesn't have good squares. And this setup with bishop on e2 and knight f2 and castle, it's very solid for white and good. However, we are not impressed. We just take on d5 to clarify the position in the center. And here we're going to see c takes d5 and e takes d5. E takes d5 is possible, and this happened in the game Toric Darko against Leon, played in Veli Losin 2024. Well, I think Leon was playing quite quickly because he knew the line, and his opponent tried to get him out of the preparation with this move. However, I think it's quite a big concession. White was trying to play safe, but as we'll see, there is no such thing as playing safe in these positions. And yeah, it takes d5 looks quite ugly. Rook e8, this is good move, putting the rook on the e file. And okay, now white is trying to finish the development. Bishop e2, bishop f8, attacking the bishop on e3. There is also a plan of g6 and bishop g7. And white goes for the very natural move, queen d2. I mean, I'm not even trying to criticize this move. However, it was better to go bishop g5, but then there is knight e5 with the double threat of knight c4 and bishop h3. So this looks problematic for white. Queen d2 was played, and queen e7, putting more pressure on the e file. Again, the bishop is under attack. And how is white to defend it? Because if white moves the bishop, then again there is knight e5 with knight c4 idea and bishop h3. White decides not to move the bishop. He goes knight d1. Now finally safely defending the bishop. But the knight is passive on d1, and it was controlling the b5 square. It was very important to have b5 under control. And now a very strong move b5, taking advantage that the knight is not controlling the square anymore. Typical move, you already know it by now. We want to open up the queen side. What can white do? Just try to keep his pawn chain intact. And now I think in the game Leon played, he took on c4 and so on, and the game finished in a draw. But it was a pity he didn't play more energetically here. He could have played a5 in order to push a4. And black has a big advantage already from the opening. Although it may seem that both sides made natural moves. For example, castle makes sense, then a4, rook b1, g6. Now the bishop can get to the long diagonal. This looks great for black. Let's go back. C takes d5, and we go a6, preparing b5 in Benoni style. Of course, white will not allow us to go b5. He goes a4. And here we go knight e8. This is a double purpose move. First of all, we want to go knight e7, then rook b8, and finally get the b5 push. And also there is an idea of f5 at the right moment. Knight f2. White wants to bring this knight into play, and on h3 it was misplaced. It could be targeted by our bishop on c8. We go rook b8. I mean, knight c7 is the same thing. Rook b8, little by little, preparing this b5 push. Well, not right now. First of all, we need knight c7. Bishop e2, white wants to castle. And now knight c7, a5. Well, we are already ready for b5, so white is tapping b5. a5, we go for b5 anyway. A takes b6, and then knight takes b6. It's good to take with the knight in order to open the light square bishop. And now we want to play f5 and then bishop f6. Of course, white managed to get his knight on f2 and almost finish the development. Probably castle can be played next move. White has a solid position, but it's lacking a solid plan here. And we managed to open up the b file, and we have this counterplay with f5. So the game just started. So this was f3. I'm really happy with this recommendation e6 because it leads to new and unexplored positions. Black is very flexible. The idea is to go bishop e7 and castle, and the positions are really playable, and black can fight for an advantage as well. Okay, now let's take a look at bishop d3. The idea is with bishop d3 is to defend the pawn on e4, and white wants to play a setup with knight f3, castle, c3, then knight bd2, and so on. I played this move many times with white pieces. This bishop d3 is a flexible move, and it allows white to reinforce the d4 pawn with c3. Here we go, e5, the classic Philidor plan. We're gaining a foothold in the center. And here we're going to see several options from white. Knight f3, d takes e5, d5, and finally, of course, the main move, c3. Knight f3, white is reinforcing the d4 pawn, keeping the c3 square for the knight. However, it allows us to take on d4. I have to mention that knight e2 leads to the same thing. So knight f3. Here we take on d4. Because white cannot recapture on d4 with a pawn, he has to take with the knight. And in this instance, it's good to fianchetto the bishop with g6, then bishop g7 will be next. Castle, bishop g7, and white goes knight c3. This is the most promising option for white. So knight c3. c4 is also possible, but then the d4 square will be weakened. For example, castle, knight c3, knight c6, and the knight on d4 is loose here. That's why knight c3 is to be preferred. Castle, of course, we want to follow up with rook e8. Here, the critical line is bishop g5. White is counting on this pin, and then he wants to go f4 and so on. It's useful to include this move h6, bishop h4, keeping the pin. And now c6, it's a good move. We are stopping f4 for now. Okay, we're going to see here f4, king h1, and even a4. So let's see them one by one. Let me show you why we stop f4. In case of f4, we have queen b6, bishop f2. How else to address the pin? But then knight g4, and we're going to take on f2. This looks bad for white. Another option would be to go a4 to stop the idea of b5. But here we can get counterplay with rook e8, king h1. White made too many prophylactic moves. Like, of course, they are good moves like a4, king h1. And now f4 would be the next move, but we strike in the center right away. d5, very strong. E takes d5, c takes d5, and followed by knight c6. And now actually the king on h1 looks a bit stupid. I think it was better placed on g1. In the meantime, we have a good play in the center. So king h1 right away. Here we can push the pawns on the queen side with b5. This is our plan. There is an idea to push b4 also to remove the knight from its active position. White follows up with his plan f4, threatening e5 or first knight f3 and then e5 accordingly. So this is white's constructive idea in this position to this f4 push. And here queen c7 is a very good move. Of course, we couldn't play knight bd7 because this pawn on c6 was hanging. We need to get out of the pin and stop e5. So this queen move does it all. And we still need to show some accuracy in the next moves. And the position is not so easy. White has some grip with these pawns. Queen f3. The idea is if we go knight bd7 to play e5. So let me show you knight bd7, e5, and then c6 is hanging. Of course, we want to play knight bd7. I wanted to do it one move before, but then c6 was hanging. So now we defend the pawn on b5. And now we're ready to play knight bd7. Rook a e1, white is bringing all the pieces into play and is finally ready to push e5. Note that the immediate e5 doesn't work because of taking and then knight g4. And pawn is lost. The pawn cannot push because of the unexpected checkmate on h2. So, but rook a1, of course, it's always good to bring all the pieces into play before breaking the position open. Knight bd7, we successfully managed to stop e5. And now our next moves could be b4 or bishop b7. It's an extremely sharp position. And if white doesn't react quickly or with good moves, then I can easily see how black takes over. So this is knight f3. Now let's see d takes e5. This is like a worse version than the Philidor endgame. White is just trying to get a symmetrical position. Really, we take on e5, knight f3. I still think position is just symmetrical, and white has bishop d3 on the board. It's good to know here a little bit, or at least how to put the pieces. So bishop c5, is the move I like here. This is an active square for the bishop. At the same time, we break the symmetry. We don't want to get a symmetrical position. Maybe at an amateur level, there is also some trap, because now knight e4, knight takes e5, it's a blunder because of not queen d4, sorry. There is bishop f2, and then we follow up with queen d4 and take the knight. No, knight e5, queen d4, there was bishop e5 check. So okay, castle and knight c6. Finally, we need to defend the pawn on e5. And just with normal development moves, black has a very comfortable position here. And from a practical point of view, I think it's important that we manage to break the symmetry, so it's not a symmetrical position anymore. Of course, position is equal, but there is plenty of play ahead because all the pieces are on the board. Let's see d5. It may be tempting to see space, but this is not a good version for white. We get a great King's Indian defense position. We go knight bd7. The knight is heading to c5, and then to attack on e4, on d3, and so on. Here we're going to see bishop e3 and c4. Bishop e3, white wants to stop us from going knight c5 by just taking the knight on c5 and doubling the pawns. So we're not going to do that. c6, we undermine white center. c4, and then, of course, it's recommended not to move the queen early on in the game, but here there is this check, which I like. The idea is we want to go knight c5 without allowing white to double the pawns. And the queen is quite active on a5, I have to say. It's not good for white to trade the queens with queen d2. We'd have a very comfortable endgame. Actually, he would probably get in trouble because after we take, if he takes with bishop, there is knight c5. If he takes with the knight or king, there is knight g4. So it's not a good idea, really. Knight c3 is the natural move, and now we go knight c5. Because of this pin, we are actually threatening to take on e4. Also, there is an idea to take on d3. White needs to defend the e4 pawn. Sooner or later, we need to take on d5, so we might as well do it now. C takes d5. And here it's good to trade some pieces, knight d3, because white has more space. And after this trade, we'll have good places, good squares for all pieces. Queen takes d3, the threat is queen b5, and then it will be very annoying. This white gets a knight on b5, which is very annoying. It could threaten on c7, a7, and so on. We need to stop this, but it's white's threat is easily parried with bishop d7, developing the bishop, of course, and our plan is to go bishop e7, castle, and then we can decide whether to go rook fc8 and play on the queen side bishop d8, bishop b6, and so on. Or if we want to prepare f5 with knight h5 and then f5. Fully playable position for black, and I like it because we managed to trade one pair of light pieces. Let's go back. So white goes c4, and afterwards he wants to go knight c3. We go knight c5 straight away, attacking the pawn on e4, and attacking the bishop on d3 as well. Knight c3, white defends the e4 pawn, and if allowed, he would like to keep the bishop with bishop c2. We're trading pieces because we have less space, knight d3, queen d3, and bishop e7. Well, it's true that white has more space in the center, but we managed to trade some pieces. There is a long fight ahead. We have ideas, let's say, to castle. But if we don't want to castle, or anyway, we can just go h5, h4 to gain some space on the king side. We can go knight d7, knight c5, and so on. Plenty of ideas. The game has just started. Let's go back. Okay, so basically the main move is c3. That's why white plays d3. Also, when I was playing this line with white, I always went for c3. And now black has several options. Main move is d5. There is also knight c6 and so on. But I like this move, knight bd7. This is less known option. It will certainly surprise your opponent, and I think it's very good. We are protecting the e5 pawn, and we are ready to push d5 on the next move. If white prevents this, then our position is flexible. We can just go bishop g6 and bishop g7. And here white has several attempts. There is knight e2, there is f4, and there is the very natural move knight f3. Let's see them one by one. Knight e2, this is not the best place for the knight, but white is better prepared against d5, and maybe he wants to go f4 later on, not immediately. Here we can go g6 because it reaches more fighting positions, but I have to say that d5 is enough for equality. So knight e2 is preventing d5, but not really. Um, let's say e takes d5, knight takes d5, castle, bishop e7, knight d2, castle. But as you can see, this is a symmetrical position. It's very close to equal. G6 is the more fighting move. Castle, bishop g7. Now this bishop is great on the long diagonal. White goes f4. This is the idea. Otherwise, this knight on e2 is not really justified. There is also this move bishop g5. This is another tempting move just to pin the knight, and then white wants to complete the development with knight d2. However, we have a nice solution here. There is h6, bishop h4. What else? White doesn't want to part with the bishop. g5, bishop g3. And okay, white could say that he managed to weaken our position, but h5. Look at this. And we want to follow up with h4, hunting the bishop, and we gain space on the king side. Good play there. Obviously, black has a great position here. So f4 is the natural move. We castle. And okay, knight d2 or f takes e5. If f takes e5, then d takes e5, and white center is quite vulnerable here. So knight d2. And I like this solution here, e takes d4. The point is to open up the g7 bishop. C takes d4 and c5. It's important to undermine white's center. Meanwhile, these knights on e2 and d2 are not so well placed because the bishop on c1 is shut off. Okay, now white goes e5. If white plays d5, then black has a great barony here. We can follow up with either c4, sacrificing a pawn, or rook e8, and then putting more pressure on e4. So e5, white is trying to play actively, shutting off our bishop, and then he wants to jump with the knight on e4. And here it's important to react correctly. Knight e8 is a good move. Usually we don't like to go back with the pieces, especially these backwards knight moves are difficult to be played, but in this instance we are defending we are controlling the d6 square, and this is very important. So that if white goes knight e4, d6 is controlled. And now, okay, white center is falling apart. White doesn't have anything concrete. White tried to attack nevertheless in the game Dolenko Chigaev played in Sochi 2019, but black won quickly. Let's go back. Then there is f4. Immediately, this is the aggressive move, trying to stop our idea of d5. And of course, if we allow white to develop on knight f3 and castle, white would get a great position. The move we're recommending here is c5. Bishop e7 is possible, but then black has to play very precisely not to get suffocated. So c6, c5 is a good move. We are putting pressure on the white center right away, and we're not allowing white to develop freely. And here we're going to see d takes e5, d5, and of course knight f3. D takes e5, and this is a strategical approach. And white claims that we have this pawn on c5, which is bad. Of course, we take back d takes e5. But now we have this pawn on c5, and ideally white wants to develop the pieces. Let's say knight f3, maybe block here with f5, go knight h3, knight c4, some a4, and of course, if white manages all this plan, black would be strategically lost. So we need to react quickly here. And here we're going to see knight f3. I'm going to put the moves like this now. Knight f3, queen e2. I just want to mention, okay, knight h3, we're going to see briefly, and this f5. f5 is bad to immediately block the center because of this tactical trick. Knight takes e4. Then bishop takes and queen h4 and check, and we take the bishop. So this doesn't work. And here there is also knight h3. But this is a bit hurried, I think. We can just play a6 and then follow up with b5, and the knight is not getting to c4. So let's see queen e2. This is an improvement suggested by the computer. The idea is to defend the pawn on e4, and then white wants to push f5. And yeah, this is critical position, and I like black solution here. I know it's not easy to sacrifice a pawn just for nothing, but it has to be done. I think black's position is much better without the pawn on c5, so we go c4. And we're going to get good piece activity in return for this pawn. Bishop c4 and bishop c5. So this is the idea. The bishop is very strong on c5, and we're not allowing white to castle short. What can white do? f5. If knight f3, putting more pressure on the e5 pawn, we can just defend the pawn with queen c7. So this leads nowhere. f5. Of course, now white is happy. He's a pawn up, and if he manages to stabilize the position, he would be winning. We go e6. We are preparing b5. It was also possible to go for the immediate castle and then with similar plans. But let's start our counterplay first. I think it's better for white to stop us from pushing b5, so a4. We castle. Notice that white king is still in the center. And now we have this idea to push b5, and after a takes b5, just bishop b7. It's okay even if we sacrifice another pawn, but we want to open up more files. And the position is very unbalanced here. But I think we have great compensation for the pawn. And actually, white is in danger. Like if white doesn't stop our initiative, we will just win the game. And of course, all three results are possible here. And now let's see knight f3. This is the most logical move, not delaying the development anymore. And then there is idea to take on e5, of course. Here we just defend the pawn on e5, and we're threatening to take on f4. Knight h3. Again, this knight is heading towards c4, and this time it comes with tempo. If white goes f5 here, then again it's good to give up this c5 pawn before white manages to get a grip on the position. So c4, bishop c4, and now queen c7. Again, we have great compensation for the pawn, but just don't take this pawn. Don't sacrifice a pawn and then be eager to get it back with knight e4 because of queen d5, and there's a double threat on f7 and the knight on e4. So don't fall for the cheap tricks. Let's see, knight a3. We can take on f4 because white doesn't have e5. We have good control over those squares. Knight c4. Of course, bishop c7. This is the best place for the bishop. And white goes e5 here, playing for the initiative. And the best way to play here is to just give up the knight with castle. We are sacrificing, but we're going to take a second pawn for the piece. And of course, our idea now is to go b5 and drive the knight away. White takes the knight. Then there is rook e8 check. It's always good to bring a new piece into play with tempo. Bishop e2, queen f6. Of course, we need to take back some material. We also want to keep the queens on the board. Castle and knight f8. This is a good regrouping move. We want to, obviously, we want to develop the light square bishop. Bishop f5 is the main idea. Or it could also be bishop d7, bishop c6, then bring a rook to d8. And in some cases, we can even play g5 to support the f4 pawn, or create some threats on the king side. The position is very unusual. Okay, white has some material advantage. It's a piece for two pawns. But we have the more active pieces, and we're going to take over the initiative soon. So let's go back. d5 is another approach to block the center and gain some space. Now it's very tempting to go c4. Queen e7 here works as well, but it looks more weird, and black needs to be precise later on. If you analyze it, you can make it work. But c4 looks just nice. Bishop c2 and then knight c5. This is the logical follow-up, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. Now let's say white goes knight a3. going after the pawn on c4. And now it's better to postpone taking on e4, because if we take on e4 straight away, white could go queen e2. And we want to avoid that. So bishop e7, knight c4. And now knight c takes e4. Now it's good to take the pawn. If queen e2, there is b5 this time. So let me show queen e2, there is b5. And black gets counterplay here. And if white goes knight f3, we can just castle, and later on we can play b5. And in these lines, white cannot take on e5, because then his king will be exposed. The king is still in the center. Okay, knight f3 is the most logical move. Simply developing and putting more pressure in the center. And here we take on d4. We want to go d5 here, but first we want to take on d4 in order to get the option to play bishop b4 check. So first of all, cd4, cd4, and now d5. And let me just stop for a moment here and look at this position. It's very exciting position, and even if you look at the computer, you still don't know what is going on here. All the pawns are in the center, and white has many options. He can take any pawn he likes, but white doesn't get an advantage here. And we have this idea to get a pawn on e4 and fork the knight and the bishop. So depending on what white does. And here we're going to see knight e5 and f takes e5. F takes e5, it's one of the possible captures. White is ignoring the fork on e4, but is also attacking on f6. D takes e4. This is the only move. We got the fork, the promised fork. E takes f6, and now only move e takes f3, because we want to weaken the d4 pawn. That's why we take the knight. F takes g7. This is very tempting. White is picking a pawn, but loses a tempo. I want to mention that queen f3, the more restrained queen f3, it's fine for black after knight f6. Knight c3, bishop e7, and black has just very easy play. We solved our problems. So white takes, bishop g7, queen f3, and we can castle here. Queen h4 is also good. This check is also good, and it can lead to a queen trade, and then we can take the d4 pawn afterwards. But why not just go castle? And here we pawn down, but we managed to castle. We're attacking the d4 pawn. We have ideas like rook e8, queen h4 check. And yeah, if white tries to defend the pawn on e3, there is a nice move, knight c5, because it works because of this pin. So white takes, knight takes e5, d takes e4. We follow up our idea. Bishop e2. Probably this is the best retreat. Here, bishop c4 doesn't achieve much because of bishop b4 check. Knight c3, and we can castle. So this is how we defend the pawn on f7. Castle, then knight b6, bishop b3, and bishop e6 is a good move here in order to swap the active bishop on b3, and black is already better here. And the other bishop retreat, bishop c2, looks well, bishop c4 looked more active to me, but here white is trying to take the e4 pawn on a longer term. However, this runs into bishop b4 check, knight c3, and now knight d5. Now it's not so easy to deal with this pin because white doesn't have queen b3. The bishop is in the way. Okay, bishop e2 looks like the best retreat. We go bishop b4 anyway, so this is why we took on d4 before going d5. Otherwise, d5 immediately would have been even more spectacular, but we want to have this check on b4. Knight c3, of course, this is the only ambitious move. Here we still need to be precise in the next moves. Like black is fine, but we still need to show precision. Castle, now it's good that we managed to defend the pawn on f7, so white doesn't have tricks. Castle, and here it's important to go for this knight b8 move that I'm going to talk about. If knight b6, white can play knight b6 looks more natural, but then white can play f5, and there is bishop g5, and we're not in time to create threats here. That's why we need to reroute the knight to c6 in order to put pressure on d4. And like this, we can also free up the c8 bishop. So bishop e3, knight c6. The knight got back into play soon enough. And like this, we forced white bishop to e3. Because of the bishop on e3, now we have ideas, let's say, to take on c3 and then play knight d5 to attack the bishop, to attack the pawn on c3. It's true that white still has this knight on e5, which is great, but black has good counter chances here. So obviously, new position and new and complicated position. Let's go back. And finally, let's see the move knight f3, the most natural move. This is also what I played when I faced this line with white. White just wants to continue the development. And it's the right time to break in the center with d5. Again, I like these positions with all the pawns in the center. d5 is the main point of the line. And here there are quite many options for white. So there is queen e2, the most ambitious to defend e4. There is also d takes e5, knight bd2, and knight takes e5. First of all, let's start with knight e5. This looks the most natural move. White is taking a central pawn and avoids the fork with d takes e4. Of course, here if white plays e takes d5, then there is e4. Queen e2 and queen e7, and white is losing a piece. So e takes e5 is not possible. Knight takes e5. And now d takes e4. We taking the pawn back, and this comes with tempo. White has to move the bishop. Bishop e2 is the most natural move. Bishop c2 leads to the same thing. And in case of knight d7, then there is bishop d7, and black has a great position here. Black even has a lead in development already. So bishop e2, knight takes e5. This endgame is good for black because the pawn on e5 will be weak for white. Queen d1, bishop d1. Here knight g4 is good. Knight fd7 is also possible, and black has a good endgame, but knight g4, this is more active. Bishop f4, defending the pawn, of course. And now white wants to go h3, but black goes bishop c5, immediately creating threats on f2. Okay, here white has to get rid of the knight, bishop g4, and knight d2. And this is my game. I was playing with white against GM Kadrich from Montenegro. I was playing in Germany, in German Bundesliga. I managed to win this game, but my opponent here sacrificed a pawn with e3, which is not bad, but it's really not necessary. Bishop f5. It's I think it's easier to play bishop f5. In my opinion, this position is about equal, but somehow black is more preferable here. But of course, there could be some positions with the opposite colored bishops and so on, but let's say black is on the better side of an equal position. So this is 95, very natural move, leading nowhere. D takes e5 is another possible capture. And now d takes e4 is the only move. Knight takes e4 just looks like a bad version of an open Spanish. So we need to avoid that. D takes e4. And now the position is again very sharp. You're not going to get bored. White takes an f6, takes a knight, e takes f3. We need to take the knight in order to have access to the e5 square. That is important. And here we're going to see queen f3, f takes g7, and castle. Queen f3 is a logical reply, but it's not so good because it doesn't prevent our plan of playing knight e5. Here, okay, queen f6 is just equal position, but we can already be more ambitious. Knight e5. Black is taking over after this move. Now we're going to see queen e2. Basically, queen e2 or queen e3, queen e4, they lead to the same thing. And there is also bishop b5. So queen e2, we just take on d3 first, queen e5, bishop e6. Now we want to go long castle. Already white is in danger here, and probably the best move for white is to go queen d4. But still, then black has a slightly better endgame. Instead, if f takes g7, taking a pawn, then long castle. We are threatening checkmate in one. And now the only way for white to bail out is to go queen e2. queen e2, king e2, bishop g7. Well, we're a pawn up, pawn down, sorry. We're a pawn down, but we have the bishop pair. The rooks will be very active. So bishop pair plus very active pieces mean more than enough compensation for the pawn. Black is already better here. White can also give this check here, bishop b5, in order to save the bishop. But then we parry the check like this. And now both the queen and the bishop are under attack. We can take on f6 on the next move, and black is already better here. So f takes g7, this is the greedy approach. White is taking the pawn, but not developing the pieces. Of course, we take back. Queen f3, this is a natural move, keeping the pawn structure intact. If white goes g takes f3, well, this looks very risky because we have bishop, queen e7, bishop e3, and then bishop h6 with great counterplay for black. Okay, we are a pawn down, but we already have some threats on e3, and we can jump with the knight on the next move. Let's say knight c5 or knight e5, depending on what white is doing. Queen f3, knight e5, of course, and now the only way to save the bishop is to go bishop b5. Bishop d7 is the good move. If we go c6, then white has queen g3, attacking the g7 bishop. So at bishop d7, we want to develop as soon as possible. Queen e2. This is white's best reply. White is pinning the bishop and at the same time defending the pinning the knight and defending the bishop on b5. And here, I like this move c6. This is a smart reply. It was also possible to take bishop b5, but let's see, c6. And now white has to be precise. Castle is the only move. Otherwise, we could go bishop g4, then queen h4, and or bishop g4 and or queen h4 and win the game. So it depends on what white is doing. But castle is the good move. cb5 and f4. This is how white is going to take the pawn back. However, white needs to find these moves. So here we can play bishop g4. This is very tempting because it comes with tempo. And then we want to go queen d5, followed by long castle, rook e8. And yeah, we're going to be a pawn down, but we have a great position. Well, instead of bishop g4, of course, other moves like bishop e6 or queen b6, these moves are also possible. Let's go back. Let's see castle. This is a strong move. White is fighting for the initiative, as we still have the king in the center. And here we go knight e5. G takes f6. Let's do the same thing. We can go knight e5 later on. It's also possible to go queen f6. But let's see knight e5. Rook e1. This is a logical follow-up. White castled in order to get the rook on e1 as quickly as possible. If white takes on g7 after bishop g7, this would only help us. And then we're going to castle next move. So rook e1, g takes f6. We are supporting the e5 knight. And here white shouldn't bother about the pawn on f3 and instead just play for the initiative with bishop f4. Here we can take on g2. Okay, we're grabbing a pawn, spoiling white's pawn structure again around the king. And then we want to cover up the e file with the bishop e6. Here we're going to see queen f3 and knight d2. Of course, the position is sharp here, so it's good if you can remember this analysis. So let's say knight d2. Okay, here bishop e6 is also fine, but we may as well take up the challenge with queen d3. Knight e4, this is the point. Queen is under attack, and there is also the threat of knight f6. And now, of course, we need precision. Queen takes d1, the only move, knight f6. This is all forced. King e7, rook a d1. While it looks very dangerous for black here, so we need to be precise, but there is a way out from this position. You just need to know it, bishop g7. And the idea is to meet bishop e5 with bishop f6. So white goes for knight d5 and king d6. Well, it's probably a good idea to remember this line if you enter it. Strangely enough, this is the safest place for the king. And the discovered checks lead nowhere, so this position is objectively a draw. White probably has to repeat the moves. Okay, so this is 92. Somehow engine-like move, this 92. Now let's see queen f3 with the idea to go 92 or even bishop c4. Here we cover the e file, of course, as soon as possible. Bishop e6, and we're hoping to manage to castle long. Now, also there is a double attack, so white is forced to take on e5. F takes e5. 92, bringing pieces into play. Okay, white has a compensation here, obviously. And there are several ways to play with black. We are giving this bishop g7, but other moves are possible as well, like bishop h6, or bishop d6 with a balanced position. Bishop g7, rook a d1, bringing the last piece into play. Queen h4. We are covering the king side, and the idea is to castle short or even go queen f4, offering a queen trade. Well, white has compensation here, but we're going to finish the development. We will be able to castle. And here, just to give some sample lines, queen b7, for example, is not an issue because we just castle, and it's much more important to bring the king to safety. Also, there is bishop f5. In this case, we can castle on the other side, long castle, knight e4, and then offer the queen trade, and the position is about equal. So yeah, my advice is to check these lines and try to remember them because they're forced and they can be quite dangerous. Let's go back. Now we're going to see knight bd2. This was tried in a few games. White is reinforcing the e4 square. Now the way to go is to just take on d4. And the idea is that if white goes e5, there is this intermezzo. D takes e3 because we're threatening to take the knight with check. And also, after knight takes d4, we have knight c5 attacking the bishop on d3, and we can take on e4 on the next move. So knight d4 doesn't really work. C takes d4 has to be done. Now d takes e4. White will be left with an isolated pawn, which gives us good play because it's easy for us to develop the pieces. Just to show you some moves here. Knight e4. Now it's useful to trade some pieces, of course, in positions with isolated pawns. The side with the isolated pawns wants to keep more pieces on the board, and here we want to just trade pieces. Bishop takes, knight f6. It comes with tempo. Bishop d3. We are ready to trade the bishops with bishop b4. Then we're going to castle, and then we will organize the pressure against the d4 pawn. And there is this move, queen e2. This is probably the most ambitious move. Actually, when I was playing the game against Kadrich, I remembered about this move, but I wasn't sure about it because the position, I mean, look at this. All these pawns in the center, I didn't know the lines exactly. So I wanted to play something I wanted to play a position where I had more control. And with queen e2, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that this move is possible. And I spent a lot of time calculating. Here we can take on e4. We're going to sacrifice a pawn, but we'll take the bishop pair and we'll have a good compensation for the pawn. Bishop e4, knight e4. Now, of course, there is a move like queen e7 here. It's possible, but it's less clear-cut. Let's keep things simple. Knight e4, queen e4, and now bishop d6. The idea of this move is to defend the pawn for now. And here we're going to see d takes e5, knight takes e5, and castle. So white has all kind of ways to take the pawn. D takes e5 is one way, but then we can bring the knight on c5 with tempo. The knight is heading towards d3. White has to be careful about it. Now there is queen e2 and queen d4. All kind of queen retreats. White keeps the queens on the board with this move and is trying to coordinate his pieces better. This was played in correspondence. Bishop e7. Now there is this threat of knight d3 check. Castle. White wants to bring the rook on d1, and here it's an important move. Of course, if we allow rook d1, white manages to stabilize the position, but we have this move queen d3. We are preventing rook d1, and we offer a queen trade. Because now queen d3, knight d3 would only activate our knight. White wants to get this trade on his own terms with queen e3. But now there is this move b6, and the idea is to bring the bishop to e6. Then we can trade the queens and castle long, bring the knight to d3. And black is already slightly better here. It's good to remember this idea with b6. It's very nice and leads to a great position for black. Let's see queen d4. So with this move, white wants to trade the queens straight away. Bishop e7, queen d8, and bishop takes d8. We still want to castle, that's why we take with the bishop. Castle and castle. And okay, white is a pawn up here, but we have the bishop pair. Now I think the pawn on e5 can be attacked here. The light square bishop is very strong. Well, of course, the knight is ready to jump to d3. Where else? So it's not easy for white to develop the c1 bishop, because then if we jump with knight d3, b2 will be attacked, e5 will be attacked, and I think black has a really comfortable endgame here. Okay, now let's see knight takes e5. With this move, white wants to trade the knight so that afterwards black will not be able to bring a knight to c5, and we saw in the previous line that knight on c5 was very active, trying to jump to d3 and so on. Queen e7 we go. We are pinning this this knight and threatening f6 to win a piece. Of course, it's never so easy. White can just castle. White wants to sacrifice the knight on e5, but wants to reinforce it with f4. So he will get two central pawns. f6, we need to go for it before white consolidates. f4, white is hoping that we take on e5 and then we won't be able to castle. And here we have a very strong move. It's good to remember it. Queen e6. This is because white cannot improve the position. And we want to free up the e7 square for the bishop after we take on e5. Now white is forced to go f5. Otherwise, we just take on e5 and retreat the bishop. So f5. Queen e7. We need to keep the pin. But now the knight on e5 lost its support. Bishop f4. We finally take the knight. What crazy lines. D takes e5, knight e5. But as usually, if the play is correct, the crazy lines end with equality. So the same is here. After massive exchanges, white will regain the piece with an equal endgame. For example, bishop e5, queen e5, queen takes, bishop takes, rook e1. Now there is this pin, but we just castle, rook e5, and bishop f5 with an equal endgame. Let's go back. Finally, let's see castle. This is a good move. White wants to take the pawn on the next move, but first he's bringing the king to safety. So now there is no good way to defend the pawn, so we're going to sacrifice it in a better way. Knight f6, queen e2. Now our poor pawn is really under fire. We cannot defend it. We need to push it. We don't want to allow d takes e5. Knight bd2. We're not able to defend the pawn because our king is in the center. but we're going to get a very good compensation for the pawn. So we castle here. The rook will come to e8. Knight takes e4. Finally, white takes the pawn. Knight takes e4. Queen e4. And rook e8. So of course, in order to get compensation, we need to have the rook on the open file. Queen d3. This is probably the most active square for the queen. Is also defending the f3 knight in case we go bishop g4. And okay, here white is threatening maybe knight g5. Then we don't want to weaken our position with g6. So it's good to play this h6, stopping all kind of ideas with knight g5 or bishop g5. On the next move, we're going to play queen f6. And then we can play bishop f5 or even bishop g4. We have the bishop pair here and the active position, and I think this fully compensates for the pawn. Okay, so these are the lines with bishop d3. I really like, let me show you the position one more. Yeah, bishop d3, e5, I think c3 is really the main move, and now I really like this solution with knight bd7. This is less explored, and most likely you're going to surprise your opponent. There is this idea, you know, the threat is stronger than the execution, so that's why we don't go d5 immediately. We go knight d7, but now d5 is will be even stronger. And if knight f3, then there is d5 and black is fine, really. If white tries to avoid it, then he needs to find some strange ways to do it. So it's either knight e2, and knight is not so well placed on e2. White doesn't get his normal setup. g6 then is fine. And there is this f4 move, which after which the play is very sharp. And here I think you need to know what you're doing. c5 is the recommended move, and after knight f3, we get this really exciting position after cd4 and then d5. I just show you all the analysis, everything is covered. You're going to get this wonderful position on the board, and your opponent will be clueless. I hope you like these lines with f3 and bishop d3. We gave some sidelines, but they have a lot of venom in them, and they lead to playable positions where you can fight for an advantage and play for a win. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.